always great to be with HCJB Global. I have fond memories of early days in Quito, Ecuador, and visiting, of course, that famous engineering tour de force there, the power stations and those great antennas, and then subsequently seeing HCJB in action, the result particularly of the ministry in so many parts of the world. So it's great to be with this sort of new expanding vision of HCJB Global. And I'm delighted you're not only resting on your laurels, which so often happens, but that you're really looking forward to the future and working hard to enhance what you're doing. What I'd like to do today is to talk about 4 basic ideas that I think may have some value as you seek not only to expand, but to enhance the quality and to integrate the things you're doing for greater effectiveness. The first is just to draw our attention to what you already know, and that is the enormous proliferation of media in the world, communication channels, and some of the implications of that. Second, the critical need to integrate these kind of channels for effective evangelism or ministry. Third area is to look at how do we actually do that when we try to bring the pieces together. What do we do in terms of partnership? What are the key principles that allow us to integrate these pieces? So that's kind of a roadmap, proliferation of media, the whole challenge of integration, and then how do we actually work together in partnership. And I'm going to be looking down at my notes from time to time, and hopefully as I look at my notes, you can look at some of the graphics that we have on the screen for you. First of all, we have to say that for many people, how evangelism and ministry is conducted is a great mystery. We know the bits and pieces, but do we have a strategic view? And if you look at the graphic that's coming up on the screen now, you'll see that what we're really talking about is a process, not an event. There are a lot of people who can cite moments in their spiritual journey that were real highlights. But for people to reach back into the recesses of their memory and to recall all of the elements that contributed to that moment, many times difficult. And we, as people who are trying to deal with different forms of communication, have to keep in mind that as we look at the whole continuum of the spiritual journey, from unbelief to active believers and mature people, those who have become believers and followers of Christ, we have to understand this is not, just a highly truncated thing. It may be true that, like some people, we have a Pauline Damascus Road vision, but the truth is, when you actually examine Paul's life, that Damascus Road experience was set in a context. He had a lot of history. There was a lot that went before that, and God, in giving him that vision, built on all that history. So in this graph, you can see that from the very early stages, say early awareness, general revelation that St. Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1, all the way through what Jesus talked about in the parables of the sower, the stone clearing and sowing and watering and reaping, and finally we come to the point of decision making and then growth and maturity. So we understand that some media are best focused on certain areas of this process, and we're going to be unpacking that a bit more. Take a look at this next graphic, because this is all about the journey to belief. Now, I don't care if you're a Quichua Indian woman high in the Andes who's having to adopt a new technique for saving the life of her children that have GI or intestinal problems, and she is being challenged to bag the witch doctor and all of the traditional things and adopt oral rehydration therapy, ORT, which, as you know, is a very simple formula of boiled water, sugar, and salt. It's a revolutionary change and goes against everything in the village. She has to buck tradition and the village elders and the witch doctors and so forth. There's enormous social implications for that kind of decision. Well, imagine people making a decision for Christ in a highly hostile environment. Whether it's a hostile environment and really major change in the person's life and commitment, direction of their life, or whether it's something simpler, there's always, as you see in this graphic, there's that sequence of information, then reflection. We get information, first of all, then we think about it. Was that bogus information? Was it good information? that information is usually then reinforced from some other sources. So we can go through this information reflection reinforcement cycle again and again and again until we finally come to that really critical moment, which is motivation. Unless there's some motivation, and we can look through the scripture from Genesis to Revelation, people making decisions and taking action based on motivation in a context. So information, reflection, reinforcement, motivation, conviction, I believe it, decision, and then finally action and commitment. Now that is a process. The tricky part is, how do we speak to the people who are just thinking about it, who are reflecting, and who are not yet motivated? How do we do that, and yet at the same time give people access to the real message if they are motivated and they're ready to make a decision? Now this is a real challenge. Here's another little graphic that kind of helps us look at the component parts to this decision-making process. You see, first of all, that horizontal line, that's motivation. People can be highly motivated, or they can actually be negatively motivated. Consider, for example, as the graphic suggests there, consider the Pharisees. They were not very highly motivated. In fact, the chief of the Pharisees said, if we let this guy keep going, the Romans are going to come and take away our privileges, and they may wipe out the whole nation. In contrast, think of the guy who was on the cross with Jesus. There were actually two thieves there. One guy who had a heart that was open, the other guy. The guy whose heart was open, it was 11:59 for him, and he knew it. So he was highly motivated. Now you look at this vertical axis and you see we've got knowledge. People can have a lot of bad information. And the world is full of people and full of bad information about Jesus. And one of the most important things for us to do is to get out good information. Now, the problem is that a person can have a lot of good information. They can have a lot of history of good information and still have a lousy attitude and no motivation. And again, we see the thief on the cross didn't have a whole lot of data. I mean, some criminals are very smart, but he was certainly not part of the intellectual elite. On the other hand, the Pharisees and Sadducees had all kinds of information. But we see that when you actually draw in this final kind of angle across here, that the sowing, watering, reaping, and discipling has to occur from the lower left-hand side to the upper right-hand quadrant. You cannot do reaping down in the bottom left-hand corner. There's got to be enough knowledge, and there's got to be enough motivation. So again, the question is, how do we, using the wide range of media that may be available to us, from interpersonal communication, sitting down over coffee, praying for people, mass media, internet, telephones, the whole gamut. As we think about our communication, how in the world do we speak to the people who are open to change and yet patiently continue to sow and water the message with those people who are resistant? And yet, it could be that 2 days, 2 hours, 2 years from now, circumstances will change in their life and their motivation suddenly catapults them forward into a spirit of openness. Last but not least is this graphic, which pretty complicated when you first look at it, but basically what you see here, and the main points I'd like to make, is you see this same continuum, the process going from left to right. Stone clearing, sowing, watering, reaping, discipling. The same cast of characters, the antagonists, the indifferent, and the seekers, and the believers. And as we look vertically, we can see these different media, everything from mass media, speak to a lot of people, down at the bottom to small one-on-one interpersonal communications. Now, what you see so clearly from all empirical studies around the world is that as you approach the decision-making point, the power of the mass media drops precipitously, and the critical importance of interpersonal communication rises. That means both of these sort of two ends of this, in terms of scale or size of media, both have enormous value, but their roles are quite different. And if we're thinking about HCJB Global and partnering internally or partnering externally with other people, how do we partner and work together and integrate the media so that we can do this effectively? I'd like to talk just briefly about the proliferation of media out there, which draws into sharp focus the need for coordination. I think you're, of course, keenly aware, for example, of cell phone and wireless technology. India now has about 320 million subscribers, and new subscribers are being added every single month in India at the rate of 5 to 6 million new subscribers per month. Many times we think sub-Saharan Africa, for example, is just a write-off economically and in terms of technology, but the truth is that sub-Saharan Africa collectively has almost as many cell phone users as does all of India, over 300 million. Now, China, of course, is the runaway winner. They have now about 800 million users, and they are adding new cell phone subscribers at the rate of 8 to 9 million per month. Now, that might be just a yawn and a so what, but consider, for example, in the Middle East, greater Middle East, where people like HCJB Global and others have been involved in using mass media, both direct terrestrial broadcasting and satellite distributed stuff and internet stuff. Now, over 80% for most of the broadcasters of the direct response is via SMS. And the studies that are going on now show that non-literates are subscribing to the use of cell phone and wireless technology at an extraordinary rate. And many rudimentary things which need to be done are being learned by non-literates so they can do their texting and do the basic stuff. Recently, I was in an unnamed Arabian Peninsula country, and out in the middle of nowhere. There are no wires, there are no cables or anything. Here are these Bedouin tents with their solar panels, and 2 miles down the road, there's a big wireless tower that has been set up as part of a World Bank project to develop this national communications infrastructure. And these guys are sitting in their tents using their computers and doing trading on the New York Stock Exchange. No apparent connection whatsoever physically with any kind of power source and no cabling. Well, now what does this mean to us in terms of communication? I think we have to ask ourselves, in the Middle East right now, greater Middle East, the internet websites that are Arabic that are actually offering people a chance to follow or to consider Jesus are getting somewhere just slightly below and up to over 1 million hits per month. And the wireless, there are now 13 or 14 ministries in the Middle East that are using wireless as an explicit form of ministry. They're averaging 20 to 100,000 downloads per month. Now, how in the world do we integrate this with more traditional forms of communication? That's a big challenge. First of all, with regard to collaboration and partnership, here is a graphic that shows you some resources. First of all, this wonderful website called powerofconnecting.net. I really encourage you to go there, take a look at that, explore it. It's got a ton of stuff that would be, I think, extremely valuable for you. Second, there is the book, Well Connected, which has become kind of a 340-page handbook on how to. It's got the theology, the theory, and I think about 60 case histories in there, 170 or so biblical references, give you a frame of reference. Most of all, it focuses on the nuts and bolts. How do we actually make partnerships work? That's available both in English and in Spanish, and there is the Spanish version of the Power Connecting website that you see on the screen there. What I want to do as we come down here toward the end is just very quickly run through 8 basic principles that we have found over the last 25 to 30 years. If you're trying to enter into some kind of partnership or collaboration with some other media source, here are things that you must keep in mind. First of all effective collaboration is driven and sustained by a great vision. What do you want to do? What is the impossible dream? Now, what are some of the qualities that these visions have to have? First of all, the vision has to be something that's bigger than you or your organization could ever do by yourself. There's got to be something really outrageous. That's the big idea. The second thing is that it's got to be something you know in your heart of hearts that God wants done. Otherwise, why would you get involved and why would you sustain your commitment? The third component is it has to bring clear added value to you, your mission, your vision, and your ministry. Is that selfish? No, it's stewardship. All of us are called to be responsible. Now, why should you engage in a partnership or collaboration with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 agencies unless it brings clear and added value to your calling and your ministry? So first basic principle is these kind of visions are always critical to both launch and sustain partnerships. Great vision that catalyzes people. Now, the second principle is over the years we've seen that frequently the quickest way to kill an effective partnership is have a great vision and then you produce this big plan. And the problem is those 2 or 3 agencies or 4 or 5 agencies have never done anything together before. And the big plan fails. And people are disillusioned and they say, we told you it wouldn't work. So, second cardinal principle is big ideas have to be broken down into limited, achievable objectives that everybody agrees on, that have high value, that can be accomplished in a reasonably short period of time because we need success. We need to see success early on. Now, if the problem you're trying to solve has been there for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or 1,900 years, what's the problem of waiting 6 months? I mean, a little delayed gratification here. You can't solve the whole problem in 12 months or 18 months, but by cracky, if we work at it hard, we can do this piece and then this piece and this piece, and by achieving these incremental successes, we're encouraged and good things happen. Here's a very simple graphic that kind of gives you a sense of what that process is like. Big idea, big vision, limited outcomes, and everybody's hope and dreams goes in the tank. However, if you take the big vision and you set limited objectives and you actually accomplish those, people have a sense of fulfillment, and guess what? Hope is enhanced and the partnership flourishes. Third critical partnership issue is this issue of trust. Relationships and trust are the absolute bedrock foundation of all effective partnerships. And I am putting up here now for you a series of 6 simple questions you need to ask yourself as you go into these relationships. Do we share a common vision? That is what we want to do. Do we share a common value? Do I know that you really have my best interests at heart? Are you competent? Can you do what you say you're going to do? Are you reliable? And are you going to keep on delivering? In other words, are you faithful? The next principle is, partnerships have to have a committed champion, a facilitator who's going to keep going through thick and thin. And each of the partner agencies or partners in the collaborative effort need to have somebody who believes in that common vision. Partnership is a process, not an event, and that typically involves due diligence, exploration, getting to know the players, then bringing people to the table, then setting the objectives, and then doing the first stages and having success, and then moving on to maturity. Effective partnerships are always stronger, next principle, when the players involved in the partnership understand who they are. They understand their vision, they understand their values, they understand their strengths, what they can and can't do. Because as we come to the table with a clear identity of who we are, what we can accomplish, the likelihood of being able to integrate these pieces, of course, is much, much higher. In the waning moments here, just a couple of final principles. One is all partnerships have constituencies, and you better know who your constituencies are. Is it your manager? Is it the people who are funding you? Is it the people you're trying to serve? whatever the partnership is, there are always going to be some people looking over your shoulder. And that's the way it should be, because they're the people for whom you're working. They are the people who are making it possible. And that means that we have to define success in our communications infrastructure and all of that to make sure those people are taken into consideration and given respect, because they're vital to the ongoing nature and the health of the partnership. And last but not least, celebration and communication. You know, when we make these incremental successes, let's celebrate it. Let's acknowledge that we come from extraordinarily different backgrounds. But by working together, the different parts of the body can do extraordinary things that can never be done when we work separately. Key to that is communication. Work constantly, work diligently at communicating with each other. And even when you don't quite make that 100%, say, you know, we hit 60% or 70%, and the people will say, you know, that's pretty good. Let's keep on going. So God bless you. We have a wildly proliferating world of communication. We know that the process of evangelism is not just one big event. We know that there's an enormous challenge of integrating all of these pieces. And we know that to do that, we've got to work together. And in working together, very clear now that there are absolutely fundamental, basic principles that have to be acknowledged. God bless you as you do it.